Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Further Afield by Miss Reed. Miss Reed has broken her arm, has been recovering for a week or so at her friend Amy's place, but has recently been able to come home. The next 2 or 3 days passed pleasurably, and I gloried in my growing accomplishments. I found that I could lift my right arm if I held it at exactly the correct angle, and even began to comb the hair on my occiput with my right hand. I became quite nimble at mounting and descending the stairs, and each small triumph cheered me greatly. One morning Amy rang me. "Vanessa is with me. May we come over?" I expressed my delight. "And another thing," said Amy, and stopped. "Yes?" "Perhaps I should wait until I see you." It was most unlike Amy to shilly-shally like this. "What's it about?" "Crete." "Crete? I don't know a thing about it. Do you want to borrow a map or something?" "No, I want you to consider visiting it with me, as my guest, of course." I was struck dumb. Are you still there?" "Partially." "Well, think about it. James can't come, but wants me to go ahead with the holiday. We'll talk about it later." There was a click, and the line went dead. Dazed by this thunderbolt, I wandered vaguely through the open French window, caught my poor arm on the latch, and, cursing, returned to earth again. The two arrived soon after lunch, and in the meantime I had turned over this truly wonderful invitation in my mind. Of course I should love to go, and so much better was I that my disabilities would not hold up proceedings in any way. We should be back several days before term began. Mrs. Pringle, no doubt, would be only too glad to have charge of the house again, and the local kennels would look after Tibby, not, of course, to the cat's complete satisfaction, but perfectly well. On the other hand, I had accepted so much from Amy already that I hardly liked to take an expensive holiday as well. My bank balance would certainly not stand the expense of paying my share, which would be the right thing to do, and so I felt that I really should refuse, sad though it was. It was good to see Vanessa again. She was dressed in a white trouser suit with a scarlet blouse unbuttoned to the waist, under which she wore nothing. I was rather perplexed about this. Did she know that she was unbuttoned? Should she be told? I decided to say nothing, but felt rather relieved that no men were in the party. On her feet were 2 bright red shoes, so clumsy and stub-toed they might have been football boots, and in her hand was a minute bag of silver mesh of the kind that my grandmother carried at evening parties. But her long hair was as lustrous as ever, and her looks much improved since the overthrow of the Bolivian Roderick, who had so fascinated the poor child when last she was in Fairacre. On her first visit to the schoolhouse, she had said practically nothing. Today she rattled on with much animation about Scotland and her work at the hotel. "And you saw Gerald?" I could not resist saying. Her face lit up. "Wasn't it lucky? He happened to be nearby. I can't tell you how lovely it was to see him again. We write sometimes, but it's not the same as meeting." She clapped a hand to her brow and looked anxiously at Amy. "The book, did we bring it?" "It's in the car," said Amy. "It's for Mr. Willett," she explained. "Gerald asked Vanessa if she would deliver it, as he knew we were coming to Fairacre." "I'll walk down," said Vanessa, scrambling to her feet. She surveyed the red football boots proudly. "These are real walking shoes," the girl in the shop told me, "but of course I mustn't get them wet." "Why not?" I asked. "Surely shoes are worn for the purpose of keeping the feet dry." "Not these days," Vanessa assured me pityingly. "That's a very old-fashioned idea. Today the shoes have a label on saying they mustn't be used in the wet." She smiled upon me kindly and went off for the book. Now that we were alone, Amy turned directly to the subject which was uppermost in our minds. "Well, what do you think? Would you like to see Crete?" "I'd love to," I began. "It won't be quite as lovely as it was when I first saw it one April. It's bound to be drier and hotter, but the air in the mountains is delicious, and there is plenty of shade at the hotel." "But Amy," I persisted, "I really can't accept a holiday like this." "Why not, for heaven's sake? It's all paid for and arranged. You'd simply be taking over the plane seat and James's bed and board. Perfectly straightforward." "But I can't afford it, my dear." "No one wants you to afford it. I told you that, so put that out of your mind, dear upright puritanical mind. I should be most grateful for your company. It would be a kindness from you to me, not the other way around." "You've done so much already," I said, weakening. "Right," said Amy briskly. "Return the compliment and help me out." She jumped up suddenly and went to the window. Her back toward me, she spoke quickly. "Things are very rough between James and me at the moment. I'm quite used to seeing him make a minor ass of himself over a pretty face now and again, but this time I'm frightened. He's deadly serious about some young thing about Vanessa's age. I've never seen him so determined, so ruthless." Her voice broke, and I moved swiftly to comfort her. She shook her head violently. "Don't be kind to me or sympathize, or I shall sob my heart out and have eyes as like red gooseberries." She fought for control and then continued. "He wants me to give him a divorce. I've refused to consider such a step until we've both had time to think things over. We shall stay apart for a few weeks, and he wants me to go to Crete as arranged and have a break. Apart from this terrifying singleness of purpose about the girl, he's as considerate as ever. It makes it all the more incredible." She turned to face me. Her poor face was crumpled, and her eyes were wet. "Now will you come with me?" she pleaded. "Yes, please," I said, with no more hesitation. Chapter 7. Flying Away. Fairacre's reaction to my proposed foreign jaunt was swift and varied. The first person to be told was Mrs. Pringle, of course, when she arrived the next morning to repair any havoc I might have caused overnight. Her response was typical. "If you ask for my opinion," she began heavily, I hadn't, but was obviously going to get it, "then I should say you was very unwise indeed." She folded her arms across her cretonne-clad bosom and settled down for a good gossip. "I take it this place is in the Mediterranean?" I said that it was. "Then don't touch the fish," said Mrs. Pringle, warming to her subject. "The pollution out there's something chronic, and the fish don't stand a dog's chance, if you follow me." I nodded. "And keep the water off that arm of yours. No bathing or any of that lark, or you'll be writhing in agony from germs." "Oh, really?" I began to expostulate. "Furthermore," went on Mrs. Pringle ruthlessly, "lay off the fruit and veg unless they've been cooked. An aunt of mine had a very nasty rash from eating raw fruit in Malta. Disfiguring as well as irritating. Never looked the same after, and she'd been a nice-looking woman when made up." I said that I should take all reasonable precautions, and rose, hoping that Mrs. Pringle would take the hint. "And another thing," she said, not budging. "You'll be flying, I take it?" "Yes, it only takes 4 hours or so." Mrs. Pringle gave a short bark of a laugh. "If you're lucky. This aunt I told you of spent 8 hours getting to Malta. First the airplane needed mending, and then when they started off 2 hours late, they found something else wrong. No petrol or one wing off or something of that. So they landed again for another 2 hours. "There's often some delay," I began, but was brushed aside. "Mind you," said Mrs. Pringle fairly, "they gave 'em something to eat while they waited. Spam and sardine sandwich." "What, mixed?" I exclaimed in horror. "That I couldn't say," responded Mrs. Pringle heavily, after thought, "but they didn't have to pay for a penny of it." She now made a belated foray to the dresser drawer to find a duster. Her face brightened. "It'll keep this place tidy for a bit longer, won't it, having you away?" Happiness comes in many guises, I thought. Mrs. Partridge, the vicar's wife, was more enthusiastic, and told me not to miss Knossos on any account. She would look out a book they had about it, and would I please take plenty of pictures so that I could give a talk, or better still, a series of talks, to the Women's Institute when I returned. Mrs. Maughan said that there was a particularly rare hawk indigenous to Crete, though he doubted if I should see one, as the Cretans had probably shot every bird in sight, like the blasted Italians. Strange, he mused, that such warm-hearted people, positively soppy about their children and so on, should be so callous in their treatment of animals. Anyway, he hoped I should enjoy myself, and if I were lucky enough to catch sight of the hawk, then of course a few close-up photos would be invaluable. Mr. Willett said it would do me a world of good to have some sea air and sunshine, although Beresford would have been a sight nearer and less expensive. His cousin had been in Crete during the last war, but hadn't cared for it much, as the Germans overran it while he was there, and his foot was shot off in the upset. Still, he added cheerfully, it should be nicer now the fighting's over. I don't doubt you'll have a very good time out there. Crete, mused Mr. Lamb at the post office. Now, would that be the one up in the right-hand corner, shaped like a whelk? Cyprus, I said. Ah, then it's the one with the famous harbor, Valletta? Malta, I said. That's so? Well, I must be getting nearer. It's not that triangular one off the toe of Italy, is it? Sicily, I said. Don't tell me, begged Mr. Lamb. I'll get it in the end. It's not one of that lot like a hatful of crabs hanging off the bottom of Greece. You're getting nearer. It's the long, thin one, he shouted triumphantly. Am I right? Was some old city a chap called Sir Arthur Evans dug up with his bare hands? Our scoutmaster told us all about it one wet evening when the cross-country run was washed out. I don't know about the bare hands, I told him, but the rest is right enough. Mrs. Coggs, who had been waiting patiently to collect her family allowance while this exchange was going on, hoped I'd have a lovely time and come back sunburnt. Joseph, who was with her, looked alarmed. You are coming back? He asked. Joseph, I assured him, I'll be back. The next few days passed in a flurry of preparation. Amy fetched me one afternoon for a last-minute shopping spree in Caxley, as I was still unable to drive my car. She had a wan, subdued look about her, so unlike her usual energetic manner that my heart was wrung for her. She mentioned James only once, and then simply to say that they had seen each other once or twice and now proposed to think things over and have a discussion after the holiday. At least I'm supposed to think things over, said Amy bitterly. As far as I can see, his mind is made up. How this chit of a girl could have managed to get hold on someone as intelligent as James, I simply can't imagine. We were flying from Heathrow at a little after 11 in the morning, so that we did not have to make one of those dreadful journeys by car in the small hours which so often add to the traveler's discomfort. It was one of those cold, gray summer days when Amy came to collect me. A chilly wind whipped round the corners, scattering a few dead leaves and wreaking havoc with our newly arranged hair. I've got one of those net things with little bows all over it, confessed Amy, when we had finally stowed our baggage in the boot and checked yet again passports and other documents. But I look like a culture vulture from the Midwest in it, and I'm too vain to wear it, although it does keep one's hair tidy. I said I had a silk scarf if the wind became too boisterous, but I looked more like little Mother Russia in my headgear. Besides, I said, it grieves me to pay £1 to have my hair fluffed out and then see it flattened in 5 minutes. Rain began to fall as we approached the airport. Won't it be marvelous to leave all this murk behind? Crowed Amy. Just think of the blue skies waiting for us and all that lovely sunshine. Our spirits rose and remained high throughout the leaving of the car, the taxi ride through the tunnel, and the slow shuffle through to the departure lounge. We found a seat, disposed our hand luggage around us, and settled down to watch our fellow travelers and to look at the magazines we had bought to pass the time. It was while we were thus engaged that it suddenly dawned upon me that Amy was looking uncommonly nervous. It was the first inkling I had that she might suffer from the fear of flying. Do you mind flying? I ventured. I loathe it. replied Amy with some of her old energy. "In the first place, it's dead against nature to have that great lump of metal suspended in midair, and no amount of sweet reasoning is going to budge that basic fact from my suspicious mind." "But think of the thousands and thousands of people who fly all over the place daily." "Lucky to be alive," said Amy firmly. "And think of all the hundreds who died in air crashes. I always do." "You shouldn't dwell on such things. If you hate flying, you can't help dwelling on such things. Then think of all the thousands of screws and bolts and rivets and so on, supposed to keep the bits together. How can you be sure every one of them is reliable? What about all-over metal fatigue, not to mention having so little time or enough mechanics to service the thing properly between flights?" Amy, warming to her theme, was much more her usual forthright self, and I was pleased to see that, for a time anyway, James was forgotten. "And then there's fire. I don't feel at all happy about all that petrol being dumped into the thing before you start off." "Better than forgetting it," I pointed out. Amy ignored me. "How does one know that there is not some ass with a cigarette drifting about nearby, and we won't all be burnt to a cinder on the tarmac?" "There are fire tenders." "I dare say, with the crews in the canteens swilling coffee, and you frizzled before they can stick their axes in their belts." At this point, a confused noise came from the loudspeakers. Someone with his head in a blanket was evidently honking down a drainpipe. The message was quite incomprehensible to my ears, but an alert young man nearby spoke to us. "Gate 9, evidently." We collected our baggage and joined the queue. "Well, here we go," said Amy resignedly. "I wonder if the pilot is a dipsomaniac." We settled into our seats, Amy insisting that I took the one by the window. Through it I had a view of the rear side of the wing, and beyond that the gray expanse of the airport, with only the brightly colored tankers and aeroplanes to enliven the scene. "Thank heavens it's daylight," said Amy, "and we shan't be able to see the flames shooting out of the exhausts. I face death every time I get into a blasted plane." "It's a quick one, I believe." "I wonder. I always imagine twirling round and round like a sycamore leaf, with one wing off." "Caught in the enemy's searchlights, I suppose. Amy, you've been watching too many old war films on television. Have a barley sugar and think of Crete." The engines began to roar, and the airplane began its interminable trundling round the airport, bumping and bumbling along like some clumsy, half-blind creature looking for its home. Amy had closed her eyes, and both hands were clenched in her lap, resting on the glossy cover of a magazine which had blazoned on its corner, "Australia, only a day's flight away." Suddenly the pace of the engines altered, the roaring was terrifying, and we started to set off along what one sincerely hoped was the correct runway and the path to Crete. Buildings rushed past in the distance, the grass dropped away, the wing of the airplane dipped steeply, and far below us, tipped at an absurd angle, the streets and parks, the reservoirs and rivers of Middlesex hung like a stage backcloth. Excitement welled in me. Amy opened her eyes and smiled. "Well, we're off at last," she said with infinite relief in her voice. "Now we can enjoy ourselves." The adventure had begun. Part 2. Farther Afield. Chapter 8. In Crete. Our first glimpse of Crete was in the golden light of early evening, for we had been delayed at Athens airport. It would have given Mrs. Pringle some satisfaction. If we had known how long we should have to wait for the airplane at Heraklion, we could have taken a taxi into Athens and enjoyed a sightseeing tour. As it was, we were told at half-hourly intervals that the mechanical fault was almost repaired and we should be going aboard within minutes. Consequently, we were obliged to wait, while Amy and her fellow sufferers grew more and more nervous, and even such phlegmatic travelers as myself grew heartily sick of cups of tepid coffee and the appalling noise and dust made by a gang of workmen who were laying a marble floor. It was infuriating to be so near the cradle of Western civilization and yet unable to visit it, tethered as we were by the bonds of modern technology, and pretty imperfect technology at that. But our view of Crete from the air dispelled our irritation. There it lay, long, green, and beautiful, in the sea so deeply blue that the epithet wine dark, which one had accepted somewhat skeptically, was suddenly proved to be true. Below us, like toys, small boats were crossing to and from the mainland, their white wakes echoed by the white vapor trails of an airplane in the blue above. We circled lower and lower, and now we could see a white frill of waves round the bays, and white houses clustered on the green flanks of the hills. Away to the west, the mountains were amethyst-colored in the thickening light, with Mount Ida plainly to be seen. By the time we had gone through customs and boarded a coach, it was almost dark, and we set off eastwards along the coast road to our destination. It was a hair-raising ride. The surface of the road, probably one of the best in the island, was remarkably rough. The coach which had met us rattled and swayed, seats squeaked, metal jangled, windows clattered, and the driver kept up a loud conversation with our guide, only breaking off to curse any other vehicle driver foolish enough to cross his path. We soon realized how mountainous Crete is. The main ridge of mountains runs along the central spine of the island, but the coast road, too, boasted some alarming ascents and descents. Part of our journey was along a newly built road, but there was still much to be done, and we followed the path used by generations of travelers from Heraklion to Agios Nikolaos for most of the way. The last part of the journey took place in darkness. The headlights lit up the white villages through which we either hurtled down or labored up. Occasionally we saw a tethered goat cropping busily beneath the brilliant stars, or a pony clopping along the side of the road, its rider muffled in a rough cloak. Every now and again the coach shuddered to a halt, and a few passengers descended, laden with luggage, to find their hotel. "I wouldn't mind betting," said Amy with a yawn, "that we are the last to be put down." She would have lost her bet, but only just, for we were the penultimate group to be dropped. 2 middle-aged couples and a family of 5 struggled from the coach with us, and we made our way through a courtyard to the doorway. We were all stiff and tired, for we had been traveling since morning. A delicious aroma was floating about the entrance hall. It was as welcome as the smiles of the men behind the desk. "Grub," sighed one of our fellow travelers longingly. He echoed the feelings for us all. And next time, we will follow Miss Reed through her first days in Crete.